Hi everyone, my name's Bing. I work at the Illinois Answers Project. And to start, I think we're going to just start by establishing, what this technology is, why we're building this technology. So we have Emily Easton. Here, I'm going to turn on her mic. Emily is the Director of Education at the Chicago Quantum Exchange. That's a network of researchers and companies in the quantum space. She leads the organization's education and workforce initiatives. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So to start, we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar project to develop a technology that's not here yet. So I think a good question is, why does the world need a quantum computer?
It's a great question. So I'm going to preface this by saying I'm a social scientist, and that's why I'm so glad that Dr. Goss is here with us. As Dr. Goss has been a quantum scientist leading Chicago State's University quantum program for years now, and can help dig into some of the technical questions. But a big part of my job is explaining just that. What is quantum science? What is quantum computing? And more importantly, why should we care? Why is this important? And one of the reasons specifically when it comes to quantum computing is that this is a technology that, number one, has been in development. The fundamental principles are about 100 years old, but the technology has been accelerating in the last few decades. And it's important at this time because there are these initiatives happening all over the world. And the United States, and Illinois specifically, has an opportunity to be the leader here, which not only carries with it economic promise, but also promise to mitigate some of the risk that comes with the security issues that will come with quantum computing. It is a technology that is positioned to radically change the way we are able to solve problems, and the opportunity to be at the forefront of this opens up a really exciting set of opportunities, some of which I'm hoping I get to talk about in the education and workforce space.
And that totally makes sense on a macro level. We're talking about things that could impact the country, but in terms of me, a resident of Chicago, how does this impact my everyday life 10, 15, 20 years down the road?
So here's an interesting example of one way that it could impact all of us. So has anyone here ever gone to log into a website and they text you a 6-digit code?
Yeah.
Do you know what that is? I did not. I use this anecdote a lot because it's one of the first things that I learned as I was learning about quantum. So what that is right now we have classical computers. And classical computers using zeros and ones are very good at solving some types of problems, but they're very bad at solving other types of problems, namely factoring very large numbers. It's very difficult for even the most powerful classical computers we have to take a 25 or 30-digit number and get it down to its 2 factors. When you go to log into a website, what's really happening in the back end is that there's an equation that holds your data secure that is x times y equals a 25-digit number that only has those 2 factors. When you go to log in, the website sends it x and it texts you y. And when you enter that number, it solves the equation and your data unlocks. And the reason that works is because a classical computer would need to try every single number to get to that y number, and that would take an estimated 400 to 500 years, which means hackers wouldn't really have a way to hack into that very quickly. One of the promises and one of the risks of quantum computers is that because quantum computers are effectively able to use not just zeros and ones, but in effect all numbers at once, they're able to move through and identify what that variable is in a predicted 45 minutes, which all of a sudden means the way we're keeping our data secure gets much riskier and much easier to hack into. And this risk is severe enough that last year, the National Institute of Science and Technology started changing all of the standards that federal agencies need to use to keep things like the nuclear codes secure away from this 2-factor standard, because the risk of a quantum computer that can solve that equation and unlock people's data is so severe they need to take those steps. There's another example I can offer too that may be helpful. Has anyone in this room here ever been hacked? Yeah, right? Usually, I know we're limited for time, but usually when I'll ask this question, I'll also ask, how did you find out? And the answers are, well, they used my credit card to buy things, or they sent emails out under my email, like you found out because the hackers did something with what they were able to do. That's because we do our best to keep our networks secure, but they're not. One of the promises of quantum technologies is also in its ability to network, build provably secure networks, because when a quantum network is hacked, it shuts down. Meaning that if the information has gone from point A to point B securely, it cannot have been intercepted. When you get hacked and you only see the after effect, it's because right now we aren't currently able to identify when a network has been hacked until something happens. If we're able to develop these technologies, our information will be more secure. And that's one impact that's very near term that I wanted to highlight because I feel like it's something we're all used to or used to.
I see, so it's also about personal data protection.
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask, I think there are residents who've shared with me, we're putting so much of the state's money and the city's money into and it feels like kind of we're waging a bet. Like, will these companies make these computers? Will these computers work? Can you address the concern of, why are we taking such a, why are we waging a bet with, taxpayer money?
I think it's an interesting question. I think about it a lot from the workforce front, because that's where I focus, right? So I focus in education and workforce. And the perspective I want to offer here is there's a lot of opportunity to build a quantum workforce, but I think even more importantly, there's an opportunity right now to capitalize on the interest to build a broader STEM workforce, which is a workforce we know we desperately need in the United States, in Illinois, and in Chicago. And when we look at the jobs that are coming along with the Illinois Quantum and Microelectronics Park, but also with all of the quantum companies who have been located here already for years, the base skill sets they are looking for are in mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, and computer engineering. All three of which are fields right now that are already in demand. One of my hopes for this project is that we are going to spark and drive interest in students learning these fundamental fields. And if they go into these fields, whether they go into quantum or not, there are jobs and there is job security, because we have leveraged this moment to start getting them excited about learning the math, learning the computer science, and learning these skills we know we need now, however they choose to apply them.
Yeah, and on the workforce front, I think by now there's hundreds of jobs that are announced at the site, and I think the question for South Chicago is how many of those jobs will be jobs that would be for the for the people of this community, and how many of the broader jobs also would be for accessible by people of all education levels.
So I work on this a lot. I look at the workforce projections we have that are very broad, and I'm always looking to figure out how soon can we make them more specific, and what are the ways in which we can make them more specific. So some of the strategies that we're using in the region are bringing employers together to start to align on the skills they all need, or that groups of them need for certain roles, so that as we are preparing students, it's not a more traditional workforce model of one company wants X, so we train students in just that, but rather we're building collaboratives of companies that are telling us across those companies what they need, so that students have, as they come up, and young professionals, or people who are changing careers, come up and have more opportunities. In terms of the types of jobs that we are seeing, we are anticipating a rise in far more hands-on roles that do not require graduate degrees or even bachelor's degrees. One of the things that's being built at IQMP is a cryo plant, which is effectively a way to take gas helium and make it a liquid. In order to do that effectively, they need welders. They need people who are capable of operating that equipment, and they also need people who are capable of operating the machines that use that. It's called a cryostat cryostat facility, which are basically like high-powered refrigerators. Interestingly enough, the technicians who are qualified to do that work, a lot of the experience they're looking for comes out of HVAC or automobile repair. It's those kind of same mechanisms are actually the skills that they're looking to draw on. It's not necessarily the quantum science that you need to be able to have. You need to know how to run machines, and specific types of machines and machines that are capable of these kinds of things. So those are some of the jobs that we see coming online that we think are going to be more broadly accessible than some of the jobs we've seen in quantum in the past.
Right. And like I think just and thank you so much for giving us a broad view of what it is and what the workforce looks like. Can you talk about how long before we are able to see, because we're talking about a computer that's being developed, we hope it works, so how long before something like this comes online as a useful product?
If I had the exact answer to that question, I would probably have a much more significant role. I can tell you this is, again, something that the Chicago Quantum Exchange monitors very closely, that quantum ecosystems around the country and around the world monitor very closely. There are projections, I don't know if any of you saw the announcement today that Pascal, a French quantum computing company, is planning to set up at the Illinois Quantum and Microelectronics Park. One of the projections they shared was 2026. Other projections will put us in the 5 to 10 year range. Everybody is working to finalize those projections, but right now that is a variable we are still working within. It is important to note too, there are other applications of quantum science technologies that are in use right now. And quantum sensors, which I feel like nobody pays enough attention to yet, these are technologies that we are already using. Last October, Boeing flew a plane outside of St. Louis using quantum sensing navigation only, which is very important as we think about what navigation looks like in places where GPS systems are blocked or unavailable. Has anyone ever driven in Lower Wacker Drive? Yeah, right? You're down in those tunnels and your GPS cuts off and you're terrified, right? That's because you are relying on a navigation system that comes from satellites. Quantum sensing navigation uses the same technology that knows when I pick up my phone, it is on silent, so it's not going to do this, but it lights up when you pick it up. That's because there's technology in our phones that can detect it is moving. Quantum sensing navigation relies on being able to figure out your position based on how your phone is moving or how you are moving. This is effectively at a larger scale that same technology that Boeing is using to fly planes, and that may change overall the way we are able to do navigation on our own devices, but also for larger scale applications like planes, like boats, things like that. And that is technology that's right now. That is happening right now.
Thank you so much, Emily.
I hope this was helpful.
Next, we're going to talk to Professor Stacy Sutton. She teaches at the University of Illinois Chicago. It's in its Department of Urban Planning and Policy. She's a director of the Solidarity Economy Research Policy and Law Project. So she's here to talk about the impact of these big developments on communities and what are some examples of inclusive developments and what does that look like? So to kind of set the groundwork, when this project was announced, there was mixed reactions. Some were for it, some were against it, but I think the big question a lot of people who lived near the project had is what's in it for us. So can you start off by kind of explaining when there's a big project like this, what typically is the ripple effect on the community that lives around it? Good, bad, and anything of that sort, or otherwise?
Yeah. Good evening. How's everybody?
Good evening.
Oh, you turned it off? Sorry. Okay, I will turn it on. That's easy enough. I don't need quantum anything. Got it. Can you hear me? Yeah, I think it's working. Yeah, it was lit a moment ago.
Oh, yes.
Yes, there it is. Okay, thank you. So that's a big question, and I knew the question beforehand, so I prepared for that question. And at the same time, it's still difficult to answer because what we're talking about, I don't know the science, so I'm not going to try to speak to the specificity of this project. But in terms of what I do and look at equitable development across the country, and organizing toward equitable development, I can speak to mega projects and how we have mixed results with mega projects generally across the country. whether they're technologically driven or it's a stadium, and whatever. They are mixed results. And so to answer that, I think what communities, it's not a binary, the good and the bad, right? And there are a myriad of stakeholders involved in any mega project. And by mega project, maybe I'll just, so you know what I'm talking about, those typically are place-based projects that are very complicated in terms of the dimensions. They're capital intensive, they have a myriad of stakeholders involved, and there's usually public and private capital going into those projects. That's a simplification, and the smallest would be about $100 million in terms of the size of a mega project, all the way up to billions. So all of those projects need to be located somewhere, right? That's just how gravity works. That part of science I understand. Yeah, I'm a social scientist, definitely to you. The way I think about it is there are kind of spheres of influence in the sense of where those projects get situated, the communities that are most proximate will bear the burdens and should receive the benefits, first and foremost. It's a wider sphere of stakeholders that should also receive benefits, right? But the way I think about these mega projects, because we have essentially a pretty large data set now across the country, what tends to happen is those benefits get negotiated away. That community residents, their voice is not, it's often not seen at the same level in which others are sitting at the table. So if it's capital or municipal leaders and so forth, right? So all of that makes for a very complex set of factors that we're trying to negotiate, regardless of the type of project. I think what I bring to the conversation is really trying to advocate for and to point to examples in which communities have won. And I say win because many of these projects get articulated as economic development. And that's what I do, economic development, sure. However, who actually benefits from that development is the question. And this happens again and again. Who's able to remain in place such that these projects, which receive 10 to 30 years of subsidy from our tax dollars, will the residents that are most near or nearest to those projects, will they be able to benefit? So those are the kinds of questions that I ask. I don't remember your question. But I asked a lot of, that's how I
Well, I think this is a good time to sort of maybe dig deeper into so what do local residents typically do to ensure that they benefit?
Yeah, I think the ensure is a question, because I don't know that we don't have a lot of examples in which they ensure, right? There's a few mechanisms or tools that communities use, right? And we talk about community benefit agreements, and we see how that works on Woodlawn and other places. That they don't have a lot of teeth, right? It's a relationship or an agreement between the developer and the community. They're strongest when a municipality is willing to enforce them. But when the developer finishes their role, right, and they agree to hire 100 people, and those are typically construction jobs and they're short term. And when they're finished that, and they may not come from the community, so there was no agreement that they would hire locally and so forth, because they said they're hiring union, and with unions that becomes really complicated if you're in a black or brown neighborhood in terms of who has access. So what happens is the tool, the community benefit agreement, is watered down, if there is indeed one at all, one that's signed. Because once that developer is finished with their role, and if they sell the entire structure, or they move away from that structure, and now it's occupied by the businesses, perhaps the community didn't think of it that way, and there's nothing to hold the businesses accountable. right? So there are multiple layers. I will tell you a couple of really good examples. Can I say an example?
Yeah, because I do think it's good to talk about, where, what kinds of policies or CBAs have been effective in preventing displacement and providing those benefits to the people that live near the sites.
Yeah, so in terms of, as I said, the community benefit agreements, I think they're important to do, but it's also important to know they don't always have teeth. They're important to do because it mobilizes community, right? We're coming together around something that we have to be able to have this democratic discourse and say, okay, what are the things we want? They become limited because we often don't ask for enough. We ask for a few jobs. We ask for, no, I said, you ask for, there are examples in which people ask, you're not going to get it all, but you asked for the most, right? There's no reason not to. So that's one. In Baltimore, so there's a tool that development that is used often, payment in lieu of taxes. So, not-for-profit entities like universities, hospitals, and so forth, they don't pay taxes, by and large. There's some parts of taxes. In Baltimore, Johns Hopkins, it's a huge entity in West Baltimore, and they did a whole redevelopment project. A coalition formed of labor, community activists, folks that are doing kind of a new economy work and so forth. An array of actors and organizations came together and established, I forgot what it's called, With Us, For Us. And this coalition is using this, what they call a pilot. They're saying these large institutions that aren't paying tax should be paying into a pool. And those resources should be used, controlled by communities, and used for community. There's a very successful example in Baltimore already in which those resources are used for youth. And so across the country, people are trying to make things that concrete. Like, where can that revenue come from? It's one thing to say we want 100 jobs, right? I mean, when U.S. Steel was at its max, there were 20,000 jobs. So 100, that I'm not impressed. But, and I'm not saying anyone said 100, but I'm saying we should be asking for more. But when you can get to the level of how might we generate this, right? And put the pressure on the city to really stand behind that, because you now have a cross-section of actors that are saying, yeah, we all benefit from this. Those tend to be the strongest. There are other examples of more conventional development projects, but I think it's the organizing that.
That's really interesting, pulling resources from entities that are involved that can then go into the residents, for the residents. So I think our last question here would be, what is the role then of elected officials, of city officials in all of this? People in the community are worried about displacement. They want to make sure they benefit. And so what is their role?
The elected officials. So, in theory, everybody's like, well, in theory, they work for us, right? In theory, right. In theory, they work for us, and there are these election cycles, and so we see them act in different ways depending on where we are. But I mean, of course, and not to be facetious, our elected officials have to stand with the community, right? And when they don't, there should be penalties for not doing that, right? We have to be able to unelect them. Because if they are not... So what we get caught in is the discourse around, well, we need to generate jobs. And absolutely, I have a job. I think everyone should have a job, that can work, have a job. But our elected officials, when we ask them for something, they say we don't have the revenue, we don't have money for it. But they have other things, even if they don't have the money. They have clout, they have legitimacy, they have connections, right? So they can make these things work if they're willing to put pressure on capital. And that is what our elected officials don't typically do. Because they operate in this subservient way in which capital dominates. Whereas it doesn't have to be that way. the people and the politics can dominate, and then capital has to be responsive. That's a huge shift in the logic, but it happens in certain places in the US, you know what I mean? Meaning, and when our elected officials realize that there are repercussions for not responding to community, not having community's best interest, then they start to act a little differently. In terms of displacement, I mean, that I can go on and on. I do a lot of work on gentrification. I'll just say very quickly. There are not too many good examples in which people eventually aren't displaced, right? So again, we have to think of what time frame are we talking? People may be there for 5 years. So I'm originally from Brooklyn, born and raised, came here 10 years ago. And so the whole borough has totally changed. So the development projects, the Barclay Center, that development, people were opposed to it. Yet there were always other people that thought it would be good, it would raise property values. What folks may not have thought about is how high those property values would go and what that means in terms of taxes. And who can move in, all of that, how the culture of the neighborhood changes. And how you no longer feel like it's your neighborhood even though you can remain in place. So I'm a proponent of change. Like, yes, things should change, development. But we have mechanisms. We can put ordinances in place that the same way we're giving tax breaks to capital, we can put ordinances in place that maintain your tax rate for the same amount of time. If that's a 30-year deal with the developer, then why don't we have, Philadelphia did it for 10 years in Central City. So again, there are examples. I think we just have to ask for more.
My name is Maxwell Evans. I'm a reporter with Block Club Chicago. I live in South Shore, honestly less than a mile from here. This is my neighborhood library. It's beautiful in here, as you can see. And yeah, I've covered South Shore, South Chicago, Hyde Park, Woodlawn, a lot of neighborhoods along the South Side's lakefront for about 6 years at this point. Lived in the neighborhood for the same amount of time. And so yeah, I really appreciate what Professor Sutton had to say about a lot of the topics we've been discussing throughout this meeting, kind of being framed through business, through power, through capital. And what I kind of see my role as a reporter is to fill in the gaps in other media outlets not being able to kind of connect with community members, connect with residents in the same sort of way. Journalism is a mess of an industry and it's very difficult. I'm not trying to assign blame, but again, I kind of see my role as get to know people around me, get to understand what their concerns are and reflect those to everyone else. And so with that in mind, what I'm hoping to do is bring up Ann Holcomb and Clifton Muhammad, two residents of the area who have been very vocal in terms of environment, in terms of demands around community benefits that Professor Sutton had so clearly explained in other projects. And so, yeah, with Ann first, we'll be discussing kind of some of the environmental concerns as well as the protections that neighbors, activists in the area would like to see put in place. So, good to see you, Ann. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Sorry. Just a reminder that the only way to ask questions will be through the slips or through the QR code. So please make sure to ask that way, and we'll just read them out loud afterwards.
All right. So just to start, could you kind of just explain briefly who you are, what brings you up here today, why you're interested in saying yes to my request?
Hi, my name is Ann Holcomb. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes. I am a 15-year resident of South Shore. I live only about 7 blocks from here, and I live 3 blocks from the U.S. Steel Southwark site, which has just recently been appropriated by Related Midwest. And I'm the co-chair of a group called ETHOS. It stands for Environment, Transportation, Health, and Open Space. We started 11 years ago as a little itty-bitty block club of people that live along South Shore Drive. And we did that because of a previous developer of the U.S. Steel Southwark site. It was McCaffrey Interests. And we heard after a meeting that then Alderman Pope had that they were going to make South Shore Drive into a 6-lane expressway so they could advertise to their upper income residents that they had planned for the McCaffrey development that was only a 15-minute drive to downtown. That would have displaced well over 1,000 people at the 71st Street curve. I would have had an expressway in my front yard, which I probably wouldn't have been displaced, but it wouldn't have been a very nice place to live. And expressways are environmental nightmares. All the oil and the gas and the exhaust and all that stuff, and we don't need that next to the lake. So we were fighting that, and we kind of won because it doesn't exist. Anyway, there's a longer story to that, but we're here to talk about the current developer. Now Ethos has 200 members, mostly in the 7th Ward and the 10th Ward. But we also have members in the 4th, 5th, and 8th wards as well. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and so with that background, what I'd like to hear from you is mainly on two fronts. And first off, on the southeast side, I don't have to explain to many of the people here, but it's an environmental justice community. There are a lot of concerns around the development of this site, how it will impact a neighborhood already with so much industry located within it. And so there's obviously a sensitivity in terms of making sure this project is done in the right way, and in a way that does not damage the health of the residents. And so can you talk a bit about what specific sort of environmental protections you would like to see around the site as this is developed, especially with the groundbreaking just taking place last week?
I'll start with the story, and it goes back to the second major failed developer of the Steel Southwark site, Emerald Living in Barcelona Housing. They were around in the mid-2000 teens, and we were really excited about them. They wanted to build modular homes, single families, townhouses, and they were going to build some mid-rises, and they even came to us and they reduced the size and the height of their mid-rises because we said we didn't want buildings that tall. They were going to have renewable energy. They were going to have a lot of solar power on their buildings. They were going to have a lot of green space. They were going to have native plantings. They were going to have a community center. We loved them. I don't know if we would have needed to fight for a community benefits agreement, and we are now trying to fight for a community benefits agreement with the current developer, Related Midwest. So they suddenly bailed, and we were shocked. And I was at a meeting sitting next to, I think she might have been a legal assistant. She worked for, I believe, Emerald Living. And after the meeting, she said, I can't tell you what's in the ground because U.S. Steel made us sign a bunch of non-disclosure agreements, basically saying that we couldn't disclose this information.
And I do just want to hop in there and say that this is I've been looking into this for a while now. I've not been able to confirm that. I know you have mentioned it. It's a very serious concern in the community. I just want to say for the record that that's not something my reporting has been able to lock in at this point. Right,
and it is hearsay. I mean, it was somebody that said to me after a meeting she couldn't go on record saying it, right? So what they did say to the media, and it's well out there, is that they left because of the industrial heritage of the site. So it doesn't take too much to put two and two together and verify what she told me more specifically. But she said there's going to be other developers coming, and you should look into it. And so we looked into it. And I want to do also a disclaimer about this. This is not from the Better Government Association. It's not from Illinois Answers. It's from Ethos. And I have about 40 copies of this with me if any of you want to take it home. And I can pass it out after the meeting. But it just lets you know this is from Ethos. It is not from the sponsors. This is a list of 17 different toxins that we know are in the ground over there. We found out using open source archives of the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, and sources are cited on the paper. So if you want to dig in and verify this stuff is there, you can. This stuff is old. Some of it goes back to the mid-90s. Some of it goes back to 2005 because we can't get the new stuff. It was under a non-disclosure agreement. However, we recently got a preliminary report back from some soil scrapings that we did of the site earlier this year. Just soil scrapings. In the middle of winter, we went out there with spoons and we're digging in the ground and putting it in baggies, and we did soil samples, and we got that information back. It was analyzed by a lab at Indiana University, and the stuff is still there. Okay? We know it is still there. the author, the professor of that study is going to publish. So I cannot give you the paper that he gave to me, but I can tell you with my word of honor that it is still there, that at least 7 of these toxins, and the lab is not done, are still there, and the concentrations are moderate to high risk throughout the site. That's the median risk of the median samples. But then the rest of the samples, like you take like the North Slip area, which we always suspected was a hot zone based on the historical data, we know that that is still a hot zone, and there it is extremely high risk for human health.
And yeah, especially with that knowledge that this was a steel mill for over 100 years, that obviously that has a degrading impact on the environment. I would like to know, what sort of environmental protections would you personally, are you hearing from your members, from neighbors, as the developers build on this site? What do you think they should be required to do as they build to keep the rest of the community safe, or specific environmental protections?
Right. So first of all, Ethos is not opposed to Quantum. Ethos is not opposed to Related Midwest. Ethos is not opposed to we kind of would prefer DARPA not coming, but we accept that as part of the package. We're not opposed to the development, all right? There are some groups that are. They want a flat out stop to the whole thing. We are not. And we are part of the Alliance of the Southeast. We're an organizational member of a coalition that is the Southworks Coalition for a CBA that the Alliance of the Southeast is behind, right? And so, but I think there's like 40 other groups that are part of that coalition. So they're not opposed to it either. We're looking at the groundbreaking that just happened last week as possibly an opportunity. We have 100 years of pollution that went into that land. It's a corporate mess, right? So we need big corporate money to clean it up. We don't have a federal EPA anymore. The 2 people I was talking to at the federal EPA, they're gone. Okay, Trump eliminated that whole department. Okay, so we need that corporate money to clean this up, to make this a healthy community for us and our children. So we're not opposed to the development. We just want it done right. And the concerns that we have, for example, we know the ground is toxic. Say they're going to put caissons near the North Slip, which the Quantum area is not that far from the North Slip. It's part of the area that's pretty toxic. So at least the north end of it is. And so caissons are these big stilts that they put in the ground. And they're going to have to dig them pretty deep because it's sand. So they're going to have to go down through limestone to hit bedrock so they can support up to 17-story buildings, which I know the renderings are pretty low rises, but the zoning allows for 17-story buildings. And they may build some cooling towers there that would be 17 stories. Cooling towers for the cryogenic plant, the water use and all that. So if you're going to do that, put a high hazard tent over it. Put those vacuum machines in that clean the air. And I'm using layman's language here because I don't think there's environmental remediation engineers here. But we consulted with 2 and they told us what we need to know, right? So the thing is then on top of that, you can do dust suppression techniques. Dust suppression techniques, the old and tried and true way that they've been doing for 50 or more years, is you spray water. So you dig, you spray water, all right? That won't do anything for the volatiles. The volatiles are the gases, and we know there's some of that down there too. But it'll do a lot for the heavy metals if they spray the water. Like wherever they're building, have lots of water being sprayed, right? And so those are just a few of the techniques that can be done to build safely. Now, one thing after they're operational, we're really concerned about the water use. We don't want water drawn from Lake Michigan. We don't want heated water dumped into Lake Michigan. That could happen. There's waterway rights that were rezoned. Okay, when it was rezoned last fall, early winter, they got waterway rights, so they could do that, right? However, there's a thing called a closed loop system. And that's where you have cooling towers. The water that doesn't evaporate is saved, cooled, and then recirculated so that it's less water being used. It's also less pollution in the air. We're concerned about steam, okay? Well, data centers have a lot of steam. We already are hot enough in Chicago. Anybody that lived through this last summer knows all about that, right? So we don't want all the steam evaporating. There's ways to capture the steam. There's ways to capture the steam so it becomes water again, and it can also be recycled. There's also ways that you could maybe use some of that heat that's being generated to actually heat the facility. So in the wintertime, they stay warm because the heated water is transversing through the veins, the arteries, the pipes of the facility, like radiators almost, right? So there are ways to do this safely and economically feasible and green. It's green not to do this with the water. One thing that we haven't solved is the noise. So data centers, quantum facilities, they throw off a lot of noise. And there's a noise that we can't hear. It's called infrasound. Infrasound messes with people's heads. It causes depression, it aggravates PTSD, and it really distorts wildlife, like birds that are migrating. And this is the Mississippi Flyway, so all the birds, not all, but I'm exaggerating, but a lot of the birds that migrate to the south come through this area, right?
I do also want to note that the developers in their proposals that were passed through the council, they did make plenty, I'm not able to recite them off the top of my head, but they did take into consideration their location along the Flyway, and that was an aspect of this development that, I mean, yourself, other neighbors had brought up during plan commission meetings, city council proceedings to really hammer home that this is a lakefront environment. Nature has retaken much of the area that has been abandoned for 30 years, and so just to your point that the developers have said that the Flyway and the green space will be consideration at that point.
The problem is, it's what they said. If it's not in writing, it doesn't necessarily happen, and keep in mind this is Chicago, and there's a thing here called the Chicago Way, right? So, that's why we want a written, legally binding community benefits agreement, a CBA, that includes environmental justice protections for people and wildlife, as well as guaranteed access to the parks that are along lakefront. I bet a lot of you, how many of you have heard of Park 566? Okay. Maybe
a lot of residents in the area, that's for sure.
So it's kind of an untold secret. It's an undeveloped park that runs along the north end of the site. It's going to be surrounded by private property, as is Steelworkers Park, as is the south end of Rainbow Beach Park. They don't have to give us access. So we want that in writing too. We want to be able to use our parks, and we feel that since over $1 billion of our tax dollars at federal, state, city, and county levels are going in to subsidize this development, they ought to put something into the parks. They ought to put something into Bowen High School and South Shore High School and New Sullivan School, which is right across the street, and make these schools state-of-the-art STEAM academies. STEM plus arts.
I do hate to cut you off there, but I do want to get into a conversation with Clifton here along a lot of those lines in terms of what the community is asking for from that agreement. So really appreciate you running through that. Things in terms of, and what I hope to get into here is chatting about just a broad overview of what residents' best case scenarios, worst case scenarios, middle ground kind of situation, what that looks like. So thank you for being here today, Clifton. If you could start just kind of sharing, not speaking for the neighborhood, not speaking for the business community, just for yourself, what is your biggest hope and your worst fear about this development?
Oh goodness. Well, I'll tell you how I got here. I actually started like not too far away. My grandma's house was on 71st and Cornell here in South Shore, so I spent after school there. Unexpectedly, I inherited a record shop from my uncle. And the first thing I did was I put up a big liquidation sign. I was going to sell it all. The shop refused to cooperate with that plan. My uncle's customers would walk through the front door and just tell me about his 30 years with the community. Right? Neighboring business owners would walk in and they would say, Cliff, you know, whatever you need to do, we're going to help you to keep this thing going. We've got a couple of, I'm going to talk about myself, but I'm going to ask, I recognize a couple of faces. We have a couple of business owners from South Chicago here in the audience. You know, Kenneth, TJ, you guys, I want you to keep me honest in terms of what businesses care about. That's okay. And our big business representative, Emily, if I get off track, let me know. Okay? The next thing I did was I decided to talk my wife, Connie, who just walked through the door, by the way. Move to the south side and make this community our own. We decided to take what was my uncle's record shop and transform it into really a hands-on music experience. We kind of learned, or I kind of learned, that his business was more than about getting a profit on a commodity. It was actually about creating a value through a community space. So that's what we're hoping to do right now. Your question, my biggest fears, right? I'm worried right? And talked about it. We have nothing in writing. I mean, we're huge stakeholders. What I am certain will happen, as the doctor mentioned earlier, there will be some burdens that I will bear, right? My property taxes are going to compensate for what is needed to maintain and support our new neighbors, right? My electric rates are probably going to compensate for what is needed to bring on that extra load, right? So I feel like I'm a legitimate stakeholder, right? And my worry is that I won't see a return on that investment. Quite selfishly, what I want is I want the people walking by my storefront to have more dollars in their pockets, right? So I care that the community and the residents of the community actually see some of the benefit that this potentially can bring. And I worry, I do believe that there's a huge potential. And I hear tens of thousands of potential jobs. 150, by the way, is the only number of jobs that have been committed for, on site. I worry that those tens of thousands of jobs can be connected through the internet on the other side of the world, right? While I've committed to sharing the burden immediately. There are three things that I care about. One is access. Community access to whatever opportunities come. Number two is a real connection to the community. And the third is shared prosperity, right? I want that kid. In fact, I had a kid. I had a kid's mom. She was a customer. My wife can tell you this. It's maybe a month or two ago. She walks by, she knew my uncle. She goes, "My son can't find a job." "What's your son doing?" He actually came out to one of our events. He's in school right now. What school is he at? He's at the Illinois Institute of Technology. It's a good school. What's he majoring in? He's majoring in mechanical engineering. Well, there's this $9 billion quantum project coming. He's not aware of it. I want a kid like him to feel comfortable and welcome to walk up to the front door of whatever opens there and knock on it and say, "Hey, what's happening here? Are there opportunities for me?" Right? Number two, connection. The reason I go to another neighborhood and not downtown or what's most convenient is because of what's unique about that neighborhood, the character in that neighborhood. I want that character for our community to remain, right? My worry is that there's a donut shop not too far from us. They sell donuts and coffee. I worry that there could be a donut and coffee shop opened up in the new campus, surrounded by a fence and a gate, capturing those customers before the donut shop is already here, has an opportunity to. And then the last thing is shared prosperity. I went and took a look at the Queensland, Australia website. They did a big press announcement more than a year back. PsiQuantum, same startup that's anchoring this facility, is anchoring a similar facility in Queensland, Australia. We're waiting for something in writing. Queensland, Australia has an equity stake in PsiQuantum. So that when things blow up and things are successful and these tens of thousands of new jobs come, they can share in that prosperity. I'd like for our community, our residents, to be able to share in whatever prosperity is to come to Chicago, to South Chicago. Long answer to your question.
No, I mean, that's all the answers I was looking for. I don't even have to follow up with the specifics. So I really appreciate you taking the time to outline that, and I hope that by hearing this input, you kind of get a sense of what I've seen since the announcement in July, last year. Yeah, it's been a long time already. So it's last July. Since that announcement, I've seen There is a recently announced campaign that is totally against this project, but in the almost a year and months since, I've seen a lot of excitement and a lot of frustration coexisting at the same time. This is a neighborhood that has been heavily disinvested for decades upon decades before I was even born, let alone living here and covering it. And so yeah, I hope this is kind of giving you a preview and an understanding of like all of these different things that can coexist at once, and not to like buy into the hype of like, oh, it's all one way or oh, it's all the other way. It's a very complex issue. That's why there are, what, 50, 75 people in here right now. Obviously, you all are interested. So yeah, hopefully that gave you a little insight to that.